We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chovtes, volume 29. This is the second Sicha for the portion of Eikev. In this Sicha, the Rebbe discusses a Rambam, which brings the three mitzvahs of tefillin, mezuzahs, and tzitzis. And he brings from the Gemara how these three mitzvahs surround the person and help the person to stay strong and do the right things. These are the three special mitzvahs that help the person. The Rebbe is going to bring out the unique impact of mezuzah, as it is different than tefillin and tzitzis, especially with mezuzah. The Rebbe goes through language of the Rambam and how versus the Gemara and with many details, but we'll go step by step. We're learning the Sicha Lilu Nishmas Harav Levi Yitzchok ben Chaim Tzvi Tei Nishmosei Tzrura B'Tzrei Rachayim. Aleph. In Soif Hilchos Mezuzah. So this is the end of the laws of mezuzah in the Rambam. So the way it is set up in the Rambam, first the Rambam has the laws of tefillin, and then it has the laws of mezuzah, and then it has the laws of tzitzis. So in the end of mezuzah, which is between the laws of tefillin and tzitzis, Zog the Rambam v'zel l'shoyna. The Rebbe is quoting what the Rambam says. The Rambam says that chayiv odom lihizoir b'mezuzah. A person is obligated to be careful with a mezuzah. And as the Rebbe will point out later, the Rambam doesn't use here the language mitzvahs mezuzah, the mitzvah, but it just says the obligation, and he uses just in the mezuzah, as the Rebbe will explain. And why is a person supposed to be careful with the mezuzah? Mipnei shehi choivas hakoil tomid. This is a obligation for everyone all the time, which means that the mezuzah, and as the Rebbe will explain, the impact of the mezuzah is all the time. As the Rambam continues, he says, a mezuzah on the door is a constant reminder. And this is an obligation for that reminder. It's an obligation for everybody to be reminded in order to stay focused and connected to do what Hashem wants us to do. But kol zman sheyikones v'yetze. Whenever you come in or you go out, you have the mezuzah, yivka beyichud Hashem. You come across the unity of Hashem. Of course, in the parsha of Shema is written in the mezuzah and V'ahavta. So this is the unity of Hashem. Shmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the name of the blessed Hashem. So you're always coming across the Hashem's unity in that mezuzah. So therefore, since you come across it all the time,
or for others.
And when he bumps into the mezuzah, so then Yizkoir Ahavosoi, he'll remember the Ava, the love to Hashem. B'yeir Mishnasi, he'll wake up from his sleep, and being indulged, preoccupied in the vanities of the time. And this will all remind him by going by the mezuzah, seeing the name of Hashem. V'yedan, he will know that nothing stands forever. Nothing stands eternally and forever, ever. The only thing that does, only knowing the rock of the world, the foundation, Hashem. So that immediately he'll come back to his senses, to his mind, and he'll go in the proper way. So this mezuzah serves as a reminder to the person to wake up and remember. So there is an obligation to remember the mezuzah so that it doesn't, so it reminds him not to get overindulgent in the world and to realize Hashem is the only thing that is eternal. Everything is vanities of the time, is temporary. And he'll go back to the proper ways. Okay, so that's something special about mezuzah. And then the Rambam concludes with a statement of the Gemara in Menachos with regards to all three mitzvahs, to tefillin, mezuzahs, and tzitzis. Amru Chachamim Harishonim, the earlier sages said, Kol mishi yesh li tefillin beroisho b'zroya, one who has tefillin on his hand, on his head, and on his hand. The tzitzis bevigdoi, and he has tzitzis on his garment. Umezuzah bepeschoi, and he has a mezuzah on the door. So we're talking about tefillin now, and tzitzis, and mezuzah. So says the Rambam, Murzak hu shaloi yechta. He can be assumed that he will not sin. Shara yesh lo mazkirim narabim. He has many reminders. Vehein hein hamalochim shematzilin oisei melachtoi. Those are the angels. Those are the messengers that protect the person so that he doesn't sin. The messengers are these mitzvahs that he's doing. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Choyne malach Hashem soviv l'reyav." The angel of God rests around those who fear him, vayichaltzem, and he saves them. Berich rachmana disayon. He ends up the end of mezuzah with the words, "Blessed is Hashem that helped us." Okay. So the Rambam brings down the statement after speaking about the advantage of mezuzah. He brings down the statement of the Gemara about all the three mitzvahs. Those are considered the mitzvahs that are the reminders, the support for the people. They're the angels that protect him. And he ends up with Brich Rachmana Design. Okay, that's the statement here. So, as mentioned before, so in the halachas of the Rambam mentions this statement by the mitzvah of mezuzah. Why doesn't the Rambam mention this statement either before by the mitzvah of tefillin or later on by the mitzvah of tzitzis? The Rambam puts this chazal about these three mitzvahs by the mitzvah of mezuzah. Darf men verstehen. So we need to understand. Favos bring the Rambam the Maimer. Why does the Rambam bring the saying? Kol mishiyesh lo tefillin chulu v'tzitzis. He brings down the mitzvah as it relates to tefillin, as it relates to tzitzis, chulu. Mezuzah, okay, mezuzah belongs here, but that do in hilchos mezuzah. Why does he bring it down over here in the law of mezuzah? Unit frier in hilchos tefillin, not earlier. It seems like the first place he should mention it would be in the laws of tefillin. That's the erste mitzvah was werd the mont maimer. That's actually mentioned first in this saying. Amru chacham harishonim kol mishiyesh tefillin beroshei. That's the tefillin. So why doesn't he bring it down earlier by the laws of tefillin? The erste mitzvah was werd the mont in the maimer. That's the first mitzvah mentioned in this saying, in this statement. Akoponim oich dorten, or minimally let him also say it there. He wants to say it by mezuzah. Why does he not bring it down by tefillin? Why does he only bring down by mezuzah? Now, if the Rambam just wants to bring it down after he mentions all three, he should bring it down at the end of the laws of tzitzis. If the Rambam will bring in the Maimer, if the Rambam wants to bring this statement of the sages about the three mitzvahs, Nachdem sagt, die Halachas von alle drei mitzvahs, after saying the laws of all three mitzvahs, hat das gedarf bringen später. He should have bring it down later on in Hilchos Tzitzis, in the laws of Tzitzis, which he already has all the three mitzvahs, the mitzvah of Tefillin, the mitzvah of Mezuzah, and then the mitzvah of Tzitzis. Was kommt noch? The andere zwei halachas, which comes after the other two laws, after the laws of Tefillin and after the laws of Mezuzah. He should bring it down in the laws of Tzitzis. And Tzitzis, the Rebbe argues, is even more appropriate because this special quality that the mitzvah bring about, the reminders and the angels that tell us, is specifically only by the mitzvah of mezuzah. Seemingly, that should be the main mitzvah. By the mitzvah of tzitzis, it says "Leman tizkiru," it's called mitzvah befrat uzachartem befrat as the inyan hazechira. This idea of remembering state meforish in Torah. Where does it say explicit in the Torah? By mitzvah tzitzis, by the mitzvah tzitzis. It says uriisem oisoi uzachartem. It's called mitzvah Hashem. That when you see the mitzvah of tzitzis, then you will remember all of the mitzvahs of Hashem. So we see that the mitzvah of tzitzis is associated with remembering everything else. So that would seem to be most appropriate to bring this chazal. This does not say nit benegeya to tefillin and mezuzah. It doesn't say in the pasuk that the tefillin and mezuzah are reminders. So if we want to place it somewhere, it seems to be mezuzah. The tzitzis seem to be the right place. Wie der Rambam atzmai bringt das arop b'soif hilchos tzitzis. And the Rambam himself bring this down in the end of list of tzitzis, that the that this is a reminder for everything. He brings it down in the end of the laws of tzitzis. So over there in the end of tzitzis, he should have added this statement of the Chazal. He should have brought this saying about the many reminders that a yid has to include tefillin and mezuzahs by the laws of tzitzis. And the Rebbe argues further. So this is because of the pasuk. The statement Chazal in the Gemara is also with regards to tzitzis in the subject matter in the discussion about tzitzis. Nochbe, the mokir from the Maimer, the source of the statement. Kol mishiyesh tefillin beroishay, that if you have the tefillin in your head, chulu is take mesachta menachas. It's in the tractate menachas in their sugya vega mitzvah tzitzis. That's the discussion, and the topic over there discussed in mesachta menachas is the mitzvah tzitzis. Unazoyich in Rif, also the Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, he brings it down by the mitzvah of tzitzis on the Rosh on the Gemara. They bring it down by the laws of tzitzis. Werd der Maimer gebracht b'soif hilchos tzitzis. This is brought down at the end of the laws of tzitzis. Seems to belong there. Parvos bringt us the Rambam. So why does the Rambam bring nit in hilchos tzitzis nor in hilchos mezuzah? Why does he bring it not in the laws of tzitzis but in the laws of mezuzah? So the Rebbe says this trio of mitzvahs that remind the person, the Rambam brings it only in the laws of mezuzah. Why didn't he bring it by tefillin? And why doesn't he bring it by tzitzis and only by mezuzah? And the Rambam will explain the special uniqueness of the mitzvah of mezuzah, as we will see later on. Base. So the Rebbe now is going to ask another question, comparing and showing how the Rambam does not exactly follow the words of the Gemara. There's some changes over there, and some changes can be explained, and even the other change also, but there seems to be something else going on, that the Rambam is actually changing because the Rambam is saying something different than is being said in the Gemara, and that will explain eventually why the Rambam brings down this halacha by the mitzvah, the statement by the mitzvah mezuzah. Let's look inside. Base. Euch darf man verstehen dem Shinui in Loshen Rambam legabe Loshen Gemara. The change in the language of the Rambam with regards to the language of the Gemara. V'zelushain HaGemara. This is the language quoting the Gemara. Kol sheyesh lo tefillin beroisho tefillin bezroya. He divides the mitzvah of tefillin both that it's on the head and it's also on the head. So the mitzvah basically of tefillin on the hand and the head. The tzitzis bevigdoi and has tzitzis on his garment. Umezuzah bepischoi, and there is a mezuzah on his door. Hakol bechizuk shelo yachto. This is all strengthening its enforcement that the person will not sin. Shenemar. Now the Gemara brings a pasuk. What's the pasuk the Gemara brings? V'achut hamishulash loy b'mheiro yunotek. The thread that is made up of the string that is made up of three strands will not quickly be broken. Basically, the tefillin, tzitzis, and mezuzah, the three together will keep the string strong, that it won't be broken, and the person will stay strong in his commitment in Yiddishkeit. So that's pasuk number one. And then it brings down the second pasuk. The Omer is the another pasuk. The angel of Hashem rests around his who fear him, and he protects them, saves them. So the Gemara brings two psukim. This second pasuk, the Rambam brings two, but the Rambam doesn't bring the very first pasuk. And why? Hainu. The Rambam is Aleph Mashmi Deraya from the Mershton pasuk. He omits the proof of the first pasuk. Was the Gemara brings Shenemar V'achuta Meshulash Leib Yunotik. The pasuk that the Gemara brings, that the string which is tripled will not be torn quickly, meaning that helps the person. These three mitzvahs. He doesn't bring that down. Why? Un is Moisif, and he adds to the explanation to the Rambam, Share yesh loy maskirim rabim. How is it going to help him? The Rambam articulates and he explains that because he has a lot of reminders. Those are the angels that protect him from sinning. And the pasuk says, he brings the pasuk. So he takes away a pasuk and he adds explanation. He changes from the Gemara. So for the Rambam to add explanation is not a problem, because that's the way of the Rambam, and that's also the way of those who come later to explain the words of the earlier. So the Gemara just says that lo yechta, because it says chut meshulach. He explains because he has a lot of reminders, so that's fine. But why does the Rambam omit the first pasuk that is bring down v'achut meshulach le'medi notek? So the Rebbe says like this: the hisofa for Rambam yesh levayer bepashtus. The addition of the Rambam that he has many reminders that you can explain simply why he changes that from the Gemara. As the Rambam will make that he wishes to add explanation in Divrei Hashas, in the words of the Gemara, Kederech Rambam, as the usual way of the Rambam of Bechlal, general Kedarkon Shel Basroi Lagabe Kadmoi. That's the general way of those who follow, who come later to the earlier ones. They explain the words of the earlier ones. So that's natural for the Rambam to articulate and explain the words of the Gemara. So it's not a problem that there's additions to the language of the Rambam. But the question that we have is move on, but it's not understood. Why does the Rambam take out and miss out something which is brought down in the Gemara, in the Shas? Ubefrat, ados steht b'shas al der erster inyan. This pasuk is brought down in the Shas as the matter number one, even before the pasuk Chayna Malach Hashem. He omits the first pasuk and only brings the second pasuk. Why? It comes up now with a possible suggestion, because Rebbe says, according to the Rambam, can't bring the pasuk Chuta Meshulish that it's triple, because according to the Rambam, it's not tripled, it's four. The Rambam counts the two tefillin, Shel Yad and Shel Rosh, as two separate mitzvahs. So Memela, he can't say that it's the tripled, it's four. L'chayre what man of them you can't answer. So l'chayre you could answer why he doesn't want to bring down the pasuk Chuta Meshulish. L'chitas Rambam seine Tefillin Shel Yad und Tefillin Shel Rosh, zwei besondere mitzvahs. The two tefillins, the one on the hand and one on the head, are two separate mitzvahs. Bis to the extent that the Rambam rechnet sie als zwei mitzvahs in Minyan Taryag mitzvahs. He counts these two mitzvahs. When he counts the number 613 mitzvahs, they're so much different that they get a different number. They have a different number in the 613 mitzvahs. Und the Riber, and therefore is not massive to bring in the pasuk Chuta Meshulish. It's not, doesn't fit to bring the pasuk Chuta Meshulish. Loi b'meira yenotik will not be ripped. Meshulish triple doesn't fit here well. We bald as Ladasa Rambam. Seinen es nicht drei mitzvahs nor vier mitzvahs. According to the Rambam, it's not three mitzvahs, but rather it's four mitzvahs. And the Rambam doesn't want to bring a pasuk. Well, the Rebbe says that's not a good reason not to bring the pasuk. Number one, even if it's four, four is also three, so it doesn't take away from three. It's still three strong, plus one. But it's still three, the Rebbe argues, because it's three categories. There's tefillin. Yes, two mitzvahs, but it's tefillin, mezuzah, and tzetzes. But why would the Rambam not bring the Gemara? It's aber nit mistaber. It's not seem right as mitzam zeh is as the Rambam mashmid that. For that reason, the Rambam, because there's four tefillin is two mitzvahs, that's why the Rambam doesn't bring that pasuk. Aleph, number one, afil mitzadem was those zayin and fear mitzvahs. Even from that perspective that these are four mitzvahs, is the hoysofa from the ferter mitzvah, adding this fourth mitzvah nit gereya from the maila, it does not take away from the advantage from va'achuta meshulish loy b'meheru yinotik, that a string of three is not going to be ripped. Okay, so four is even better, because yesh b'chlal Masayim Mona. In 200 there is also 100, which means in 4 there is 3 too. And number 2, the Rebbe says seif. Even though that technically it's two mitzvahs, Eich L'das Rambam seinen doch voran 3 Suge mitzvahs. There are still 3 categories of mitzvah. This tefillin is a category. Shel Rosh Shel Yad is one category tefillin. And tzitzis and mezuzah, so these are still 3, can fit into this saying, Chuta Meshulish lo yinotik. Why doesn't the Rambam say this first, the first pasuk? So while the Rebbe has an answer, the Rambam explains, he has a lot of reminders, more than what the Gemara said, because he articulates, but why would the Rambam take out and omit the first pasuk of Chuta Meshulish lo b'meiri yinotik, and he just brings the second pasuk of there must be a reason for that. And the Rebbe is going to come now up with an explanation that if you look in the words, the way the Rambam says about being careful with mezuzah, before he quotes the special Maimer Chazal about the 3 mitzvahs, the Rambam goes on to talk about the mitzvah, talks about the mitzvah mezuzah. And the Rambam doesn't use the word mitzvahs mezuzah. The Rambam uses the word mitzvah, mezuzah. That person has to be careful in mezuzah, not mitzvahs mezuzah. Why? Rabbi will elaborate in that. Gimel. We can understand this my first explanation was by mezuzah is the Rambam medayik zu sagen. By mezuzah, the Rambam is very specific to say chayiv odom lihizoyer b'mezuzah. A person is obligated to be careful with mezuzah. Anders wie bei tzitzis later on, when he talks about the mitzvah of tzitzis uh, in the laws of tzitzis, where zokt over there he says la'olam yehei adam zohir the mitzvah tzitzis, to be careful in the mitzvah of tzitzis. Sharakosuf shokla v'tola bo kol mitzvahs, because the Torah has equated it and hanged all the mitzvahs on the mitzvah of tzitzis. Kulam, all mitzvahs hang on the mitzvah of tzitzis. That's the Rambam writes over there. He says mitzvah tzitzis namar uriisav oiso zachartem as kol mitzvahs Hashem. That you will see the mitzvah of tzitzis, and then you'll remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. So the Eibishter, the pasuk makes it equates it, and he says that all the mitzvahs of Hashem will be reminded through the mitzvah of tzitzis. So here he says to be careful mezuzah. Over there he says to be careful in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the Rebbe is going to try to explain that the Rambam over here is not talking about the mitzvah of mezuzah, but rather the Rambam is talking about over here is the impact that the mezuzah has on the person. When the Rambam says chayiv odom lizor b'mezuzah, he doesn't say the mitzvah's mezuzah because he's not really talking about the mitzvah of the mezuzah. He's talking about the benefit that the mezuzah provides, because a person technically doesn't have to buy a home or doesn't have to live in a home, and he will not therefore be mechuyev in mezuzah. But yet, what the Rambam is trying to say, no, the person is obligated to have a mezuzah, not for the mitzvah of mezuzah, but for the accomplishment, what the mitzvah accomplishes. The Rebbe is going to ask later, the word chayiv is a little strong for if it's not a mitzvah. But for now, we'll see, we'll talk about it in a minute. But the Rebbe is trying to explain that perhaps the reason why the Rambam doesn't say the mitzvah, because he's not talking about the mitzvah. The Rambam before is telling us that the person is not obligated to have a mezuzah. There's no chiyuv in the mitzvah's mezuzah. But then he wants to say you may not be mechuyev in the mitzvah mezuzah, but you still should have the mezuzah because of the lasting impact. And the Rebbe will bring down, as opposed to by tzitzis later on, over there, the Rambam has already discussed the obligation to still try and have tzitzis, even if you're not obligated, because you don't have to buy a four-cornered garment. And therefore, over there, the Rambam goes back to talk about the mitzvah of tzitzis. Let's see inside. The Rebbe will explain now, possibly explain the change of the Rambam not using that a person needs to be careful the mitzvahs mezuzah, but rather he says the mezuzah, because the Rambam isn't talking about the mitzvah mezuzah. L'chayre yesh leimer. L'chayre we can say, those was the Rambam zokt. This that the Rambam says, chayav odom li zoyer b'mezuzah, that a person is obligated to be careful with mezuzah. He isn't talking about the mitzvah of mezuzah, mipnei shichoi v'sakol tomid, because this is something which is the obligation of the person continuously to be reminded when he goes in and goes out, the yichud of the Shem Hashem, to change his ways, to keep the persons to stay in focus. Is kavanose. What is the Rambam talking about? As choch mezuzah is a mitzvah she'einei choiva al ha'odam. Although a mitzvah is not an obligation, it's not mandatory on a person. Elodoimim l'reshus. This is similar quoting the Rambam as an optional. She'ein odom chayiv lishkin bebayis chayiv b'mezuzah k'dei sheyase b'mezuzah. A person is not obligated to live in a home that is obligated in a mezuzah. You don't have to live in a place which the obligation, the mezuzah obligation is there's an obligation. Kadesh yasa mezuzah. It's almost like optional. You don't have to live in a house that is mechut. So you live in a house which you have to make a mezuzah. Let's say a person wants to live in a tent. A tent doesn't have a door, it doesn't have permanent, doesn't need a mezuzah. Or Bisvine wants to live on a boat. Yeshav, let him sit there. There's no mitzvah to buy a house or to live in a house that is obligated in a mezuzah. The Rambam said. And here, what's the Rambam coming to tell us? Von deswegen, but yet, darf a Yid sich mishtadel sein. A Yid should make an effort, wegzustellen sich in a matzev, to put himself to the situation as er soll sein mechuyev in the mitzvah, that he should obligate himself in the mitzvah. That's what the Rambam is trying to tell you. While there is no, it's like a reshus, you don't have to do it, but yet the person should put himself so that he is obligated to mezuzah. There's a home abayis. He should have a home, a cheder, a room, to kennen mekayim zayin mitzvahs mezuzah, to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah. It's not an obligation, but it's an obligation mezuzah. It's an obligation to have a house which will obligate you to mezuzah. The baldas the kavone in Rambam is the ishtadlus. Since Rambam's intent is the effort that he has sich zubringen ledechiv mezuzah, he should bring himself so that he would be obligated to mezuzah. The Rambam says chayiv odom b'mezuzah to tell you it's obligation to come to the situation in which you will be obligated in a mezuzah. Was the stadlus is a pe'ula in ha'inyan reshus, but this effort is an optional matter. The effort is not for the mitzvah of mezuzah. The effort is to go get yourself a home, a place that is going to be mechuyev mezuzahs. Zog dem Rambam. This is what the Rambam says. Dem loshon chayiv odom lehizoyer b'mezuzah nit mitzvahs mezuzah. The Rambam says the person has obligated to be careful in mezuzah because we're not talking about the chiyuv of mezuzah, which is an obligation. We're talking about looking for the home or a place to live in, which will later on obligate you. Nit mitzvahs mezuzah, not the mitzvah mezuzah. That's the way the Rebbe wants to explain why the Rambam writes for mezuzah, not mitzvahs mezuzah. But the Rebbe is going to argue that the language of chayav, if it's only talking about the effort, it should say hishtadlus, it should say something different. If he's not obligated to search for a home, to be obligated, then it shouldn't say chayiv. Chayiv, and still, why does the Rambam not say mitzvahs mezuzah? The Rebbe doesn't accept this explanation. But before the Rebbe asks this question, but the Rebbe says, but this would though fit very well with why by tzitzis, the Rambam does say that the person is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. Because over there in the laws of tzitzis, where the Rambam brings that chayiv odom lizoyer b'mitzvahs tzitzis, over there he already discussed about all the effort that a person is supposed to do to obligate himself to have a garment so that he will wear tzitzis. The Rambam wouldn't repeat himself and say again, oh, but you know what? Chayiv odom lizoyer b'tzitzis, so because he just said that. Over there is the mitzvah tzitzis that Rambam is talking about. Let's look inside. The Rebbe explains now in the bracket, Malpizeh Yumtuk, and according to this thinking, that there is a part of obligation, and there's a mitzvah, and there's a part of just preparation to get to that situation. Yumtaka will be sweetened was by tzitzis, zog the Rambam, that by tzitzis the Rambam says, la'olam yehi odom zohir b'mitzvah tzitzis. Over there he says specifically the mitzvah of tzitzis. By tzitzis, kum doch the halacha of tzitzis comes, what we're saying, la'olam yehi odom zohir b'mitzvah tzitzis. That halacha, the Rambam places it, that a person should always be careful in the mitzvah of tzitzis, noch them, after he's already discussed about having to find a garment that is mechuyev b'tzitzis. Noch dem mit der Rambam hat gesagt in der Friedrich Halacha. He already said in the previous Halacha. Af al pi shein adam mechuyev liknes loy talis. Even though a person is not obligated to buy for himself a garment. Ulisate bo kedei shiyase bo tzitzis. And to wrap himself around in it in order so that he should put tzitzis in them. It's not obligation to the person to buy a talus and wrap himself around so that he should place tzitzis. So the Rambam writes already over there, for a person, a righteous person, it's not appropriate, it's not fitting to exempt yourself from this mitzvah by not wearing a garment and wrapping yourself with a garment that requires tzitzis. Person should always make an effort to be wrapped in a garment, which is obligated in tzitzis, so that he can fulfill this mitzvah. So the Rambam talks already about the person has to try to do this mitzvah. And especially, you have to be very careful to have a talus during davening. This is a terrible, embarrassing thing for sages. To pray, not being wrapped in a talus. So therefore, now the Rambam writes, a person has to be careful. Not talking about being careful to buy a garment. He's talking about mitzvah tzitzis because we just finished. He's move on. As the hemshach, the continuation in the last halacha and the last halacha. The person should be careful. In the mitzvah tzitzis is the kavone. It doesn't mean nit die Stadlus zu haben a beggar of kenem mekayim sein mitzvah tzitzis. He's not talking about here the effort that the person should put in effort to have a garment so that he can fulfill the mitzvah tzitzis. From there, in the Rambam gesagt barichas, the Rambam already spoke about this at length in the Friedrich Halacha. In the previous halacha, he just finished talking about that ein roi lot chosim. Nor the kavanah thereby. What is the Rambam saying here? As a ständig mekayim sein the mitzvahs and otuv b'tzitzis. That the person should fulfill the mitzvah. That's why it says the mitzvah of tzitzis. The Riber zog the Rambam them loshen. That's what the Rambam says. Because he's talking about being always wrapped up with tzitzis. Talking about being careful in the mitzvah. In the beged mitzvahs v'sarotchen. In the garment of tzitzis that it has tzitzis that he already has. To be careful to wear that garment all the time. But in the laws of mezuzah, what the Rambam is not telling us over here, the mitzvah of mezuzah. The Rambam is telling us about finding a place which is obligated in the mezuzah. That's why he doesn't say mitzvahs mezuzah. But the Rebbe doesn't really buy into this, that this is really what the Rambam means, because of the Rambam's Lashon Chayev seems more than just the effort to get a place which is going to be obligated in the mezuzah. It's difficult to explain so. Since here by mezuzah, retzich fort, wegen azehirus vi stadlus in an inyan shus. Here we're talking about being careful and effort in a matter which is optional, nitkin choyv ala adam, not mandatory on the person. Is nit matsim kol kach the loshen chayiv adam leizoyer. language a person is obligated to be careful is not fitting. Was mashmoy is chayvish al mitzvah. Obligated mashma appears to mean a mitzvah. Und der Rambam hat l'chayre, if that's what the Rambam means, he should darf nutzen, dem Loshen Ishtadlus Kiyos, but he should say the language of effort, wie mir gefinnen, where we find a similar case by tzitzis, whereas also, just like mezuzah, you don't have to live in a place chayv mezuzah. The Rambam says the kiloshin that you have to make an effort. So the Rambam, if the Rambam is talking here about the effort of not the mitzvah of mezuzah, but the effort to clean a place, so you should be an effort in a place. What does he say over there? That is not mechuyev. It should be effort to be wrapped around. So that's ishtadl. So you should say ishtadl is in chayv. Lachein mashma safe. So in the end, it's mashma. As chayv of adam leizayer b'mezuzah. What does it mean to be careful? Mezuzah is not talking about just the effort of buying a home or living in a place that. It says chayv means mezuzah. So then we have a question. We don't understand. Why does the Rambam not say explicitly, why doesn't he say to be careful with the mitzvah mezuzah? Why does it leave it vague? So the Rebbe explains that possibly the Rambam isn't talking about the mitzvah of mezuzah, but the mitzvah, the effort to get yourself a place that will later on be obligated to mezuzah, and not talking about the mitzvah itself, and in contrast to the mitzvah of tzitzis, what the Rambam writes later. But at the end of the day, if that's what the Rambam meant, he wouldn't say the word chayiv. Chayiv means something which is obligation. So why does the Rambam not write chayiv b'mitzvahs mezuzah, as the Rebbe will explain further in Ois Dalet? Ois Dalet, the Rebbe will explain now, while the mitzvah of mezuzah is the putting the mezuzah, and then for the mezuzah to stay there, but there's another aspect that comes from the obligation of the mezuzah, what the mezuzah does for the person. That the mezuzah is supposed to keep the person to focused and intact. So that means it's the mitzvah of mezuzah, but not what you need to do to the mezuzah, but it's what the mezuzah needs to ultimately do for the person. Look inside. Dalet, yesh leimer, habir v'zeh. We can say the explanation. Das was the Rambam sagt, chayev adam leizoyer, that a person is obligated to be careful. Meint nidam chiv azehirus in zayin mekayim zay mitzvahs mezuzah. He's not talking about being careful to fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah. Mitzvah of mezuzah is pretty straightforward. When we're talking about being careful, no, the zehirus in their pe'ula if'em. You have to be careful what the mezuzah will impact you. Von dem chefze from mezuzah v'toichna, from this object of mezuzah, and what the mezuzah means, its content of the mezuzah, what it's supposed to do. You have to be careful with what the mezuzah is supposed to be doing. And how he details as he goes on in his words. So all the time that he goes in and goes out, he will come across, he will bump into the unity of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he'll remember the love that you have to have Hashem. He'll wake up from his sleep, and his indulgence in the vanities of the time. And he will know that there's nothing that is eternal, The only thing that is worthwhile is knowing the rock of the world, Hashem. So immediately he'll come back to his mind and he'll go in the right ways. He will not fall away and stray away. He'll do the right thing. So this is the aspect of the mezuzah, not the mitzvah of the mezuzah, placing it, but it's the impact that the mezuzah needs to have on the person so that whenever he goes in and out, it's going to impact him. That inyan mezuzah, this idea of mezuzah, when he goes and goes out, is not the kiyum mitzvahs mezuzah. That's not fulfilling the mitzvah mezuzah. The ma'isa mitzvah, the act of the mitzvah, is kviyos, setting up the Pesach habayis at the entrance of the door. Zuya mitzvah, that is the mitzvah. Und der Hemshech von Kiyuma von der mitzvah, and the continuation, how do we continue to fulfill the mitzvah? We put it up once. How do you fulfill the mitzvah continuously? Bashtet, in them, it consists of the fact that he has a mezuzah on the entrance of his home, in welchen is door, in which he lives. Kiyum mitzvah's mezuzah is not blois in this manim sheikonas, because fulfilling the mezuzah, the mitzvah is not only when you go in and out. You have a mezuzah in your door. That's the mitzvah, is to set it up. Then the mitzvah to be there all the time. Das heißt, which means we're not talking. This is not was that Adam darf tun in kiyum mitzvahs. When we're saying chayv lezoyer, we're not talking about what he has to do in fulfillment of the mitzvahs. But adrabe, but on the contrary, was the chefze von der mitzvah that poil sein von Adam. What this object of the mitzvah needs to impact the person. Bald as the mezuzah enthalten sich yichud Hashem shmoyshel HaKadosh Baruch. Since the mezuzah contains in it the unity of Hashem, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, darf es beim Iden Aroisrufen dem Yizker, this should always bring out by a Yid to remember, Ahavosei, the love, the love to Hashem, and to wake him up from his sleep, don't need to know. So we're talking about the mitzvah mezuzah, but we're not talking about to fulfill the actual mitzvah mezuzah, but what the mezuzah is supposed to accomplish on the person, specifically when he goes in and go out, to constantly be a reminder to him. So based on this, it turns out, as the inyan from chayiv odom leizor b'mezuzah is a davar noisef of kiyum mitzvahs, that a person is obligated to be careful with the mezuzah, is something in addition to fulfilling the mitzvah. There is the fulfillment of the mitzvah. It's done perfectly by putting up the mezuzah staying up there. He's living with a mezuzah. But here you got to be careful for something in addition for fulfilling the mezuzah. Hovendika mezuzah al Pesach beisai. Once you already have the mezuzah, you have to be careful, these hiris in mezuzah, that this should always bring you to reflect, to remember. A reminder, as you go in and you go out, you've got to be yichud Hashem chulu v'yizkar avosei. When you go in and you go out, you got to be careful that when you bump into the unity of Hashem's name, to remember your love and to wake up. These as brengtim as to going in the proper ways. So what he has to be careful is the impact of the mezuzah on his life, that he should, once he has the mezuzah, to make sure that that mezuzah will continuously remind him that it's going to set him up to go in this right, in the right way. And this is unique by the mitzvah of mezuzah, as the Rebbe will continue to explain that by tefillin and tzitzis, it's different. In Ois Hey, the Rebbe will explain that the reminder of mezuzah is the mezuzah itself. The mitzvah of mezuzah itself is the reminder to the person. By tefillin, it's the kedusha of the tefillin, not the mitzvah of tefillin. By tzitzis, it's the fact that the Torah said it's equal to all the mitzvahs, and you'll come from the only mitzvah of these three, that the mitzvah itself, the mitzvah of mezuzah that has yichud shmo yizborech as a reminder, is by the mitzvah of mezuzah. That's why this is the most fitting place to the Rambam to bring this down. Hey, let's look inside. Apizevet men verstehen. So based on this, we'll understand. Pavos the Rambam bring the Maimer Kol Mishiyesh Loichulu. That whoever has these three things, he will be secure. Chutam Mishulish. The Rambam doesn't bring it down that way, but this fact that these three mitzvahs will help the person to go in the right path, and he brings it down Davke in Hilchos Mezuzah. Weil Davke Mezuzah is a maskir mitzadem chefze shaloi. Because only Mezuzah, specifically Mezuzah, is the reminder because of its object. Mezuzah alone, the Mezuzah is the reminder. Nothing added to the Mezuzah like by the other mitzvahs. By Tefillin zog the Rambam, by Tefillin the Rambam says, Kedushas Tefillin Kedushoson Gedoyloi. The sanctity of Tefillin is a great Kedusha. Shakol Zman Shat Tefillin Beroisha Shal Odom. For as long as the Tefillin is in the head of the person, Val Zroyoy and on his hands, who Onov Yerushamayim, he'll be humbled, he'll be Yerushamayim. He'll not be drawn into laughters and just wasted talk. And he's not going to think bad thoughts. But he's going to remove his mind to be occupied, word of truth, tzedek and right. And so that's why he has to make an effort to have it on himself all day. That's the mitzvah, to always have the tefillin. When you have the tefillin on you, because of the kedusha of the tefillin, that sort of keeps you focused and to follow the right path and the justice. And that's why you should always wear tefillin. By mitzvah tzitzis is Loshna Rambam Kinal, as we quoted before, by mitzvah Rambam writes, mitzvah tzitzis hakosuv shokla v'tola b'kol mitzvahs kolum. Over there, the Torah equaled it and hinged all the mitzvahs to it by the pasuk Zchartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem. So that means that by tefillin and mezuzah and tzitzis, an aspect of the mitzvah is what brings around that lesson. Masha Enkein by mezuzah, because by mezuzah it is the mezuzah itself. The mezuzah itself has the yichud of the Shem Hashem. See what the Rebbe says. By mitzvah kumtois, it turns out as loit Rambam is do achiluk ikri zwischen the drei mitzvahs. There is a main difference between the three mitzvahs. How they impact the person that fulfills them. So to keep the person by doing the mitzvah in this level, keeping him in the right direction, there's a difference the way these three work. Tzitzis and tefillin work one way, through additives, and mezuzah works the mitzvah itself. By tefillin is the pe'ula ala odom. By tefillin, the impact on the person is mitzat kedushas at tefillin. That's because of the sanctity of tefillin, not the mitzvah of tefillin itself. The Rebbe points out in the Aora, the mitzvah is covered over there. The Shema Yisrael, the Yichud is covered, but it's not the tefillin itself, it's the kedusha of tefillin. The Rambam writes, it's because they're the great sanctity. But das is nicht der etzem chefza der hat tefillin. That's not the essence, the object of the tefillin. The tefillin are the parchments, they get that's extra sanctity. Other from them, Muhusa mitzvah, or the mitzvah, when you put on the mitzvah, is to put on your hand. It's not to bring the kedusha. The kedusha is an additional part to it. Or by tzitzis, also by tzitzis, this thing that it's equal, and you remember all the mitzvahs, that's added to the mitzvah of tzitzis. Das was zirufta rois beim odom. the fact that it brings down by the person is chiras kol mitzvahs, remembering all the mitzvahs, is es nicht verbunden mit der Hefze von Tzitzis mitzad atzma. That's not tied to the object of mitzvah tzitzis itself, the strands and just the mitzvah itself. Nor der far, was akosuf, shoklo v'toloba kol mitzvahs kulum. The pasuk has equated, weighed, and hinged all the mitzvahs to it. That is done in addition to the mitzvah. The Torah made it equal, which means there is an additional aspect that the Torah added to the cheftzah, the mitzvah of tzitzis, is to wear the tzitzis the way it has to be. And then it has the idea that the Torah way made it equal to all the mitzvahs. Al pi hatziva b'Torah, based on the command of the Torah, is the ki ma mitzvah ausgestellt in Nazah, the fulfillment of the mitzvah is set up in such a number of strands, chulu, b'tzevat chelis, and the color of chelis, chulu, v'zayin meram is umaskir ala mitzvahs. The number is 613, and the tzevat chelis doimel l'rikiyah. There's different reminders for all the mitzvah. Aber nit as the chefze von tzitzis is poil the zchira. It's not the object of the tzitzis impact the zchira. It's just what it resembles and reminds us, and it points to different things. My time is der maskir verbunden mit mitzvahs tzitzis. If it was just the object itself, if you have a pair of tzitzis laying on the table, it doesn't do anything. The maskir is tied with the mitzvah of tzitzis because das heißt, der was der Adam is mekayim the mitzvah tzitzis. That's the fact that the person fulfills the mitzvah of tzitzis. The monti in der mitzvah lidei hanal, through the fact we do the mitzvah and it's set up with these strands and with this and with the wool. It reminds him of something else. If Allah tariyag mitzvahs and all the other 630 mitzvahs. Mashenkin by mezuzah, as opposed to mezuzah, was anthalt. Mezuzah is what is in zuzah that contains Yichud Hashem Shmei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That explains the unity of the name of Hashem, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. That's the mezuzah. Is the etzem mezuzah is a maskir? The mezuzah itself is a maskir, not the kedusha like by Tchilin, not because it points to something else. The unity of Hashem's name, that's the maskir itself. That's why that's the fitting point for the Rambam to bring it down in the place where the most maskir is, which is the mitzvah of mezuzah. That's why the Rambam brings it over here. And now the Rebbe explains that this is also the reason why the Rambam doesn't bring down the pasuk, because over there it's not talking about the extra impact on the person, the merit of the mitzvahs. But here the Rambam is talking about how this impacts the person, so therefore the pasuk wouldn't be fitting over here, as the Rebbe will explain. So first the Rebbe explains that there is a difference. Why does the Rambam bring down the mitzvah, the saying of the Chazal by mitzvah mezuzah? Because mitzvah mezuzah, the object of the mezuzah itself is the reminder, whereas by tefillin it's the kedusha of the tefillin, and by tzitzis is because the Torah has equated it. But by mezuzah it's itself. That's why this is the most appropriate place. We can also explain according to this. This triple strand will not quickly be torn. Rambam doesn't bring it down. The Gemara does bring it down. From the language of the pasuk that this strand will not be quickly ripped, torn apart, is muchach. It's evident as the mitzvahs atzmam seien die drei zusammen. The mitzvahs themselves, because they are three together, verhitten sie im Schlechte, they protect them that it shouldn't sin. Das heißt, there's chus from a kaim sein, that merit from fulfilling the mitzvahs, sei mesuve from the drei mitzvahs, what is the result, the consequence of the three mitzvahs is stark zu sein Hagana von Chet, that is so strong to protect from sin. Und der Fahrer hakol bechizuk shelo yechta. That's what the Gemara says, that person can be assumed that he's not going to sin. That's the merit of the three mitzvahs. That's talking about doing the mitzvahs. The three mitzvahs have that merit to keep the person strong. The Rambam oret ober wegen verschiedene peulos al yidei de mitzvahs. He's talking about the different activities, what the mitzvahs accomplish, what they do. Nicht mitzad zchus kiyum al zchus ha-meshulish. Not the merit for fulfilling them because there's a triple mitzvahs you're doing, kinal. Like we said before, not because you're doing the mitzvah, but what the impact is. The Rebbe passed it to bringen the minyan from vachut ha-meshulish koimer. That's why it doesn't fit to bring the chut ha-meshulish koimer. Because chut ha-meshulish means the merit of these three mitzvahs. Here we're not talking about the merit of these three mitzvahs. We're talking about what these mitzvahs are supposed to be doing. Each one of these mitzvahs impacts the person to keep him on the derech meishorim, and therefore the pasuk chut ha-meshulish is not the fitting pasuk. The Rambam only brings the second pasuk, that that these mitzvahs have the special protection for the person. But since the mitzvah of mezuzah is the chefze itself of the mitzvah, is the protection, because it has the yichud shem avaya, unlike mezuzah and tefil and tzitzis, unlike tefillin and tzitzis, which it's something added to it. That's why the Rambam brings this halacha by the mitzvah of mezuzah. Now the Rebbe explains, the Rambam writes over here in the end of the laws of mezuzah, he says Brich Rachmana Desayin, which is usually Rambam uses it at the end of a big halacha, but here is the middle of Tefillah, mezuzah, and Sefer Torah. It's all in middle of the same halacha. Why does it bring in Brich Rachmana Desayin? Based on the above, we can answer something surprising, which the Rambam writes over here, these words, Baruch Brich Rachmana Desayin. In the printing before us, in our prints, it says in the end of the laws of mezuzah, Brich Rachmana Desayin. Bless the Eibishter, the merciful who helped us. But it would seem Darki Shel HaRambam Bekama Mekoimes, the Rambam's usual way in many places to schreiben them Loshen Besim von HaSefer, when he completes the whole book of the 14 books. Or the Lakama Gur Kusoyos is some other version, Oich Besim von HaHalacha Klolis, the end of a general halacha. Here we're in the middle of three halachas, but not the Hemshach halachas, not in the middle of the flow of the halachas. Why is he add? He concludes with the praise in middle mezuzah that follows the next halachas. In middle of the continuation, Hilchos Tefillin, mezuzah v'Sefer Torah seinen ein Hemshach von halachas. They're one continuation of halachas. Why does he put it in the end of Hilchos mezuzah? But based on the above, we can say, explanation, that the uniqueness of the mitzvah of mezuzah, as their loshnot hashaychus miyuchedes to hilchus mezuzah, that this has a special connection to the laws of mezuzah. So the Rebbe explains, in them was the drei mitzvahs, tefillin, mezuzah, und tzitzis, seinen Peulen, und helfen nayin ba'avedosai. The fact that these three mitzvahs, tefillin, mezuzah, they impact and they help a yid in his service, is der inyan for Messiah zugepas beikir by mezuzah. Mainly, when can we say somebody helping? When you say helping, it connotes two things: that you're not doing it totally on your own, you need help, and also that the helper is not doing the whole thing either, but Messiah means helping you in what you're doing. So the main thing of Messiah is most fitting Tzukapas beikir by mezuzah, mainly by mezuzah. Zaindik a mitzvah was ihr hefzer, because the mitzvah of mezuzah is the object, the yichud Hashem shmoy shlakadosh baruch hu. It's the unity of Hashem's name, the name of Hashem. But the Rambam sagt früher in Hilchos mezuzah, Rambam also says earlier in the laws of mezuzah, aziz a mitzvah gedoyla, that is a great mitzvah, the mitzvah mezuzah, she yichud Hashem shlakadosh baruch hu, ba'avosei v'avedosei. This is the unity of Hashem's name and the love and the service for Hashem. So when you have an object, is Messiah the Midden. When you have an object which supports, helps the Yidden, the object itself, that is the real Messiah. Masha'enkin by the andere zwei mitzvahs, opposed by the other two mitzvahs, by tefillin is oven pu'ulosoi, by tefillin, the way it impacts, nit mitzad ha'chefza from tefillin. It's not because of the object of tefillin. Nor mitzad kedushasim kenal, but the sanctity of tefillin. Passt nit zogen, hat der Eibishter gegeben tefillin als a maskir, a messiah. The Eibishter gave tefillin as a reminder. The tefillin not the reminder. The sanctity of the tefillin reminds. He didn't give the tefillin for support, to give the mitzvah of tefillin. Gave tefillin as a support. He gave the mitzvah of tefillin, but the kedusha of tefillin gives the support. Well, that is the mitzvah tzitzis. Was hakosuv shokla v'tola b'kol mitzvahs kula. It's the pasuk that equated it and hinged all the mitzvahs on it. Nit as the etzem mitzias from tzitzis is maskin messiah the midden canal. It's not that the actual the mitzias, the existence of tzitzis is a reminder and helps the yid canal. That's not the cheptza of the mitzvah. It's a side point that it equals the number and the color. Und der Riber führt uns der Rambam bei Mitzvahs Mezuzah Davke. That's where the Rambam concludes the Mitzvah Mezuzah Davke. This is the mitzvah itself. A brocha v'shavach of them, a blessing and a praise of the fact was the Eibishter had gegeben a maskir a Messiah, that the Eibishter gave a helper and a support. So the Rebbe explains, why did the Rambam choose over here Davke to give us the Brich Rachmana the Messiah, and to tell us that this is actually a mitzvah that support, and that's more than it is by tefillin or it's by tzitzis with the mitzvah. The chefts of the mitzvah is not the support, but other parts of it become the support. So therefore, Rambam says it here. It turns out that these two ideas that the Rebbe shares here. First of all, why does the Rambam bring down this halacha over here, the three things over here? And also he finishes Brich Rachmana, is because this is dafke the mitzvah, this is dafke the mitzvah with the chefza, the object of the mezuzah in of itself. Therefore, it's a greater support. That is the support of the mitzvah. And that's why this is the real mitzvah which brings around that Messiah. Ois Zayin, the Rebbe will further explain in a more deeper way that when we're talking about Messiah helping, on one hand, it means that it's only helping, but it's not doing the whole job. Tefillin, the kedusha of tefillin basically changes around. That wouldn't be Messiah. That would be sort of the kedusha of the tefillin doing it for you. And on the other hand, you have mitzvahs of tzitzis. That is not enough just because the tzitzis reminds him, it's called mitzvahs Hashem. Maybe it doesn't really help him in the sense to change around his involvement in Havlei Ha'olam to stay focused on Yiddishkeit. But mezuzah has both aspects. On one hand, the mezuzah doesn't do it for him, but the mezuzah encourages him that the yid should do it. Let's look inside. Zayin, ba'omek yoser, deeper explanation than the explanation we said before, that the Rambam brings down the Messiah because mezuzah is really the Messiah, the mezuzah itself, not other aspects of the mitzvah, like by tefillin, the kedusha, and by tzitzis, that it's equal to all the mitzvahs. So the Rebbe gives a deeper an explanation. When the Rambam adds, "Blessed Hashem, do helped us," kumtzu atoisus hasbara in their peula miyuchedes for mezuzah. We get an additional explanation what mezuzah accomplished, and also how it's different and how it's different from mitzvahs tefillin v'tzitzis, that it's different from tefillin and tzitzis, the way it's Messiah, it helps the person. That inyan for Messiah, when you say something helps, is in azach, on a matter. Pas zu zogen, it fits to say that somebody helps, then einer helft zu dem zweiten zu tun die Sache. He helps him along. He helps him. He's not doing it for him. He helps out a little bit the other person to do the item. Aber nicht, wenn der Helfer allein tut die ganze Sache. But it's not when the helper does the whole thing, then he's not helping you, he's doing it. Demult is nicht kein Messiah, then we can't call him a helper. Nor der ganze Reise, he's the one that does it. Uli idach, and on the other extreme, on the other hand, wenn jenems Hilfe is nicht azah, was versichert nicht, is azah, was versichert nicht. If the help is such that doesn't guarantee as der mistayeh, the one who's being helped, will keren up on the zach, he should be able to do it, is doch euch nicht der MSSU. So then that also is not the true help, because we're not sure if that what the helper offers is really going to come through, help you. Und in them is euch der Öftu von Mezuzah legabe Tefillin v'tzitzis. And here, this is also the novelty of Mezuzah, that it is really the Messiah relative to Tefillin and Tzitzis. Benegeya to Tefillin, zog der Rambam, as relates to Tefillin, the Rambam says, as duruch dem was kidushoson gedoylo, through the fact that their sanctity is great. Is calls man shatfilin beroisha shel odom valzreya, for as long as the tefillin is on the person's head and on his hand, who onov yirei shamayim, he is humble and he fears Hashem, and he's not drawn into laughter, into wasted talk. He doesn't think bad thoughts, but he empties his heart, he turns his heart to words of truth and justice. Thus haste. That means, as the tefillin seine nicht bloß misayeh dem odem ba'avidose, the tefillin are not just helping the person in his service, nor kedushoson shel ha-tefillin atzma, but the sanctity of the tefillin himself wirkt, it impacts on to teufer, it accomplishes in the modem and the person soll b'shas ma'aseh sein an honor v'yirei shamayim chulu, that at the time that he wears the tefillin, he should be humble and yirei shamayim. So that's the effect. The person has to put on the tefillin and he has to wear the tefillin. But who impacts the person that he should only go after emes v'tzedek and not think about other and be an honor of it? That is the tefillin, the kedusha of the tefillin. And then on the other hand, by mitzvah tzitzis, v'sas kosu shoklo v'tolo b'kol mitzvahs kulon, in which the Torah made it equal and hinged all the mitzvahs. You will see this mitzvah, the tzitzis, and then you remember all the mitzvah Hashem. Then it's on the other hand, the mitzvah der mont them iden alle mitzvahs. This mitzvah reminds the yid of all mitzvahs. Thereby wird aber nicht gesagt, while it reminds you, but we don't say over here, as this chid is asiyon a help, that this support helps is a help. The support is a help. In Mekayim and the mitzvahs bepoil, that this will help him do the mitzvahs actually. As the mont alle mitzvahs, it reminds him of all the mitzvahs. But not necessarily to the extent when he is preoccupied in the vanities of the time, so that reminder should help him to bring him to kiyum von alle mitzvahs bepoil, to bring him to fulfill all mitzvahs in actuality. So those mitzvahs, tefillin does it all, and mezuzah doesn't necessarily even change around anything. Mashenkin b'mezuzah zog the Rambam, as opposed to mezuzah, the Rambam says, Kozmashi ikonis v'yetze, when he goes in and out, Yivka b'yichud Hashem shmoish l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He bumps into, he encounters the unity of the name of Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'yizkoir ahavosei, and he'll remember his love. V'yei oir, and he will wake up mishnas from his sleep. V'shigyoso b'havle hazman, and is indulgent in the vanities of the time. V'yeda, and then he will know shein davar ha'omed chulu, there's nothing lasting. Umiyad, immediately hu chayzer l'daitoi, he comes back to his mind. It's all about the person. The person changes it around. V'hoilech v'darkei mishorim, and he goes in the right path. Does haste. It means von ein Seite is es nicht wie bei Kedushas Tefillin. On one end, it's not by the sanctity of Tefillin. Was der Odom kommt zu the mitzvah zu, that everything the person reaches through the mitzvah of Tefillin is the pu'ula from the Tefillin. That's the Tefillin accomplishes that. The sanctity of the Tefillin accomplishes it. Nidur Chavedosu, that's not his service. Mashenke by mezuzah, as opposed to by mezuzah, is the Yichud Hashem for mezuzah, maskir u'ma'orer dem Odom, the unity of the name of Hashem, Hashem's name, the Shema Yisrael of the mezuzah, reminds and encourages them Odom as zol durch the mezuzah gedenken, that through the mezuzah he should remember Avosei, his love. When Yoyer Mishnosi, he should wake up from his sleep and say weiter. Umitzad Hasheni, and on the other hand, is a snidyu of mitzvah tzitzis. It's not like by the mitzvah tzitzis, which we're not sure. Maybe yeah, maybe now. But Sakosov Shokla V'Tola B'Kol HaMitzvahs U'Zachavtem Skol Mitzvahs Hashem. The Torah equated it, weighed this, and hinged this to all the mitzvahs. Like you remember all the mitzvahs Hashem. Aber sie wird nicht auf dem Odom zu stellen sich in a matzav from Shinu Gavra. But it doesn't impact the person to place him in a situation that he should change, the person should change. Doesn't change the person. Like hanging by mezuzah does by oifen, but by the mezuzah it changes the person. Those spoiled as the gavre soll nicht stane werden. The person should change to them was yisker havosei, that he should remember his love, yer mishnosei, wake up from his sleep, v'shigyoyse b'havle azman, and his indulgence in the vanities of time. Biz as is chayzer ledaitoi, he comes back, goes back to his mind. And he is and goes to the correct path. The mezuzah helps the person change his ways. The tzitzis, it reminds him about Hashem, but it doesn't say that it helps him change his way. When the mitzvah is moving, so how we understand, as the Emes said, Inyan from Mistayeya, the true idea of a helper, this has the suruf taroiv by Mistayeya, to the extent that this calls out, brings out by the one who's being helped to mention the Father Ebrish, to bless the Ebrish, to thank Hashem for this. It's Dafkin Mezuzah, is only especially Mezuzah. Was is Misayeya dem Eden as is Ogem Derech Yosha. That helps the Yid to go on the path, the right path. Mezuzah, the Rambam's writes, Berichtem Asylum, to give out the uniqueness of Mezuzah. Mezuzah doesn't do it for you. and it doesn't leave you hanging. Mezuzah helps you change so that you will be awakened. Mezuzah helps the person that he should go in the proper way. Oisches. So the Rebbe now takes this idea of Messiah also to explain why the Rambam, when he brings down Dafkin, the laws of Mezuzah, this Maimer Chazal, and he says that these Maskirim Rabim, which includes all of it, the Tefillin and the Tzitzis, but he brings it down by Mezuzah because the real place where they save him from sinning is by Mezuzah. Based on the above, it's also understood was der Inyan from Maskirim Rabim Chulu Shematzilin Oisim Malachtoi, that these many reminders that save him from sinning bring the Rambam Dafke by Mezuzah. He brings it specifically by Mezuzah. While Be'etzem is those that emisser Geder Fun Maskir. Because this is really what the reminder is supposed to do, is that they protect the person from sinning. That's a reminder. That's the real function of a reminder. The emisser und Shlemis de Kepula from Maskir Zain is the true and full impact to remind somebody is nit blois ader monok for them. We're not trying just to remind you about something. Which has no connection to actually impacting action. Or that I'll call upon him ki loss or as if he did it. That's not what it's about. Nor beloshin or pirusha yedua that niskorim benasi. That when they remember, and then that it's done. When they remember, then it accomplishes as the zechira is ba'ifim koseh, that you're remembering in such a way as a spoil to machtanasiyah, that it impacts and it brings about action. Valderech nizkorim benasi. I won't just remind you like by tzitzis. The reminder there, okay, so there's mitzvahs there, but what does it got to do changing you around? Mezuzah reminds you to change around, wake to change his direction. Similar to remembering Exodus of Egypt. Was this chira b'shleimusis? When is it really remembering? B'shasis ba'oifun azeris dos roya is when you see it. Margish, you feel it. As quoted by Chazal, chayiv lirois as atzma. You have to see yourself. You have to feel yourself. Ki'ilu yotza hayoyim mitzrayim, as if you went out today from Mitzrayim. That's the real ultimate remembering. Remembering is to make a difference in action, to feel, to bring down as if actually this is happening. Nazam maskid is dafke b'mezuzah. That reminder is dafke b'mezuzah. The tefillin is not a reminder; it does it for you. The tzitzis is just remembering; it doesn't change you. That's mezuzah. Kenal as mezuzah is misayeya. Und poilt as soll sich überstellen in a matzav haroi. It impacts that he should change himself over, put himself over in a good fitting condition, und gain bedarchi yishorim, meshorim, and go in the proper way. So the Rebbe is going to say that this also encompasses not just the quality of support, but the time of support. The support of the mezuzah you have all the time. It's not no limitation to it. Tess. Other siyuah for mezuzah, this support you get from the mezuzah is not noting the eichus for siyuah canal. It's not just in the quality of the help you get. Not only in their kamus shebazeh, but also in the quantity. How much, how long, how much time. In Seder Achaim von Reuv Eden, sein Faram bechlolus zwei matzon. In the order of life of most Yidden, generally there's two conditions, there are two situations. Wie der Yid gefindt sich bifnim, as the Yid is in the inside, B'daladamas shel Torah tefillah mitzvahs, in the 4 cubits of studying of Torah and davening and mitzvahs, in the holy parts of life. In a matzav of kedusha and avodas Hashem, he's in a condition of holiness and service of Hashem. And then the other one is vergeta rois in a chutz from Welt, then when you go to the outside of the world. In Haneg be'em minhag derech, and to go conduct, do in the ways of the world. Und das ist bechlolus der Chiluk zwischen den Mitzvahs Tefillah und Tzitzis oder Mezuzah. This is the general difference between the mitzvahs, Tefillin and Tzitzis, and then, on the other hand, Mezuzah. Durch the mitzvahs von Tefillin und Tzitzis was der Eid legt al Rosh V'Zurayah, when the person puts on the mitzvah Tefillin, when he puts on his head and his hand, und trokt al Gufa, and he puts the talus on his body, is mesuvav b'mitzvahs. He's surrounded by mitzvahs, which means that he's befnim, he's on the inside. The Eid is abgetelt von inyone olam. The Yid is separated from worldly matters. It is verbunden mit dem Eibishter mitzvahs. He is tied to Hashem in the mitzvahs. But the mezuzah on the other hand, was gefindt sich al Pesach Beisai. It's on the entrance of the home. It's on the tefach, which is close to the outside. It madgish dem Eden's Verbundenkeit mit Neubishten. That emphasizes the connection, the tie of Yid to Hashem. Also when he goes out into the world and the outside. That even on the outside, he's still connected. And this is the Teuchna Inyan, was the Rambam is Masbir Madgish Bilchus Mezuzah. This is the idea, the content of the idea that the Rambam explains and emphasizes in the laws of Mezuzah. Mezuzah kum der Monen dem Yidden. The Mezuzah comes to remind the Jew as nit nor zayndig betoich beise, not only when you're at home, bifnim, when you're on the inside. Dav der Yid v'chol inyon of zayin behesem mit Yichud Hashem. So then the Yid and all of his matters need to fit in with that unity of Hashem's name, Shmoy Shel HaKadosh Baruch Shem Mezuzah, God's name which is in the Mezuzah. Nor oich ven geht arois ba'olam shechutz imenu. Even when he goes out into the world which is outside. So there too, he needs to be encompassed. He needs to be fully taken through and through, with that unity of the Shem Mezuzah. Und der Yifka, beyichud Hashem Shmei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shem Mezuzah, the fact that you come across, you bump into, you meet up with the Yichud Hashem, the unity of the Eibishter's name, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shem Mezuzah, that poilzai, this needs to impact. As afile ben erizar eingefallen havle azman. Even when you have fallen into the vanities of the time, is Yizker Avose, to remember your love, v'yer mishnase, and wake up from your sleep, v'shigyoso b'havle hazman, and your indulgence in the vanities of the time. Aber euch das ist noch nicht maspik. That's not sufficient yet to remember that and to arouse it. This needs to also have an inner impact. V'yedan, he needs to know shein davar ha'omed la'olam alon me'olamim el yediyas tzur ha'olam. There's nothing that stands forever and forever ever, only knowing knowing Hashem, knowing the rock of the world, knowing Hashem. So immediately that gives you back, you get back to your knowledge, to yourself, till it impacts your action. He goes in this straight path. Then, and only then, that also when you're outside of a Jewish home, is ein avodas Hashem ki deboy, he serves Hashem as should be, is do, then there is, when they're filled b'shleimus, and you feel fully them siyua from them Ebersten, the support of Hashem. Those bring him levarich Hashem. This blesses, then you bring Hashem. Berich Rachmana Desayim, you thank Hashem for helping you, because you feel the complete help that Hashem provides you, that not only in the shul, not only outside, and that's why only by the laws of mezuzah, the Rebbe brings down this idea of the Maisa B'Poilel, that this changes the Nasik, because they because that's what only the mezuzah is, what that accomplishes, and that brings the person to bless Hashem for his support, because it is the support from Hashem. Does bring to levarach Hashem, the bless Hashem, brich Rachmana Desayin, blessing Hashem that supported us. This is Sichos Shabbos Parshas Bamidbar Tovshin Daled Mem.